I think in the context of the current phase of the war, when Russia is having an upper hand over Ukraine on the battlefield, Ukrainians were hoping to organize this big conference in Switzerland where China would come and kind of have an unequivocal support of Ukraine's so-called peace plan, which is essentially saying that Russia should just surrender, withdraw, and then they start negotiate. So Putin and Xi kind of confirming that China is essentially listening to Russia's point of view on that is quite disconcerting for Ukraine and the West in general, I would say.
Yeah. I wonder whether you think that behind the scenes, Xi has some influence on Putin when it comes to Ukraine.
Well, I think you have to understand that, this is a very important thing for Russia. I mean, it's got itself involved in much deeper and in a more problematic way with Ukraine than it anticipated to begin with. But now it's involved. It has kind of burned its bridges in many ways with the West. It's the only way for it to come out successfully from it, despite all the casualties and so forth, is prevailing on the battlefield. And whatever China might say or do, it's not going to change this fundamental thing that it is a very, very important enterprise for Russia. But equally for China, seeing Russia losing or weakening itself in that war is not going to be a particularly attractive proposition, because, of course, China itself is under increasing amount of sanctions, tariffs. We just talked about the AUKUS deal with the nuclear submarines going to Australia. I mean, it's all against, well, in a sense, who is it against? Of course, it's against China. So in that broader context, of course, China sees much more closer point of view of Russian, because Russia is a guest with the West. There is a pressure on China from the West, and they both in the same boat in that sense, and very difficult to change that, to be honest, without changing very radically position towards China.
Yes, no, they sort of tied themselves to one another economically as well. Let's talk a little bit about the point you just raised about just the gains that Russia has made. You've really just seen in the last couple of weeks, as Ukraine has been waiting for this much-needed military support, Russia is just kind of walking into some places. Ukraine hasn't really wanted to fight to the death in these instances.
Yes, well, I think there is a problem with these delays in American aid, but it's not the only problem Ukraine has, and it's a much bigger problem is essentially wearing off of its army personnel. So in tandem with the increasing, they have been going on, mobilization been going on since the beginning of the war, and that has not been enough. So the increasing, tightening up the screws, trying to get as many more people who not really wanted to go into the army anymore to the battlefield. And Russia at the same time, because Russia has about 5 times more population than Ukraine now, it really has this advantage both in manpower, in time to prepare them, and also in ammunition, because it's not relying on anybody else to supply its weapons. It's producing everything itself. So so that really is difficult for Ukraine, because it's being stretched, and Russia just opened up a new front near Kharkov, which it's kind of advancing slowly but surely there. The point for Ukraine is not looking promising, even if the supplies from the West reach it. That might not be enough, although, hopefully that's not it's not going to change things fundamentally, but medium-term perspective for Ukraine doesn't look good.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point that you raise, which is something that I guess people understand, even though it's gone off the front pages, is this fatigue and this how does Ukraine, President Zelensky, who's now decided to stay at home as an indication of the seriousness of the situation, how do they keep that momentum? How do they keep that desire to fight a Russia, to your point, that's not going anywhere? I mean, Putin is not going to give up on this fight.
Well, that's right. And I think the Ukraine just been having first few days of nationwide blackouts, energy blackouts, because the Russia has destroyed almost all of it non-nuclear based power generation. And so it's really kind of striking home, and now it's summer, but what come winter, what it will be even more difficult. The mobilization laws are extremely unpopular. And I think the other thing undermining it all is that there is no real prospect. I think it's kind of understood quite well that Ukraine will just return to its pre-war borders anyway. So the key question is, what is all the suffering and effort for if the prospects of winning is actually not there. So it is very hard for it. At the same time, Zelensky himself committed to this idea of winning outright, and they're having his peace plan of basically Russia just withdrawing from Ukraine and then paying reparations, which they're going to talk about in next couple of weeks in Switzerland. So he committed himself to this outright victory, but at the same time, the realization there is it's not going to happen. So it's very, very hard, both for Zelensky and for the Western leaders who really committed themselves repeatedly to winning on the battlefield, and it's not happening. And what do you do next? Do you escalate, like Macron may be suggesting, sending in troops, or do you start accepting that Russia might actually keep those gains in the post-war settlement? Very, very difficult decision to be made.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And, look, we've seen what happened in Slovakia overnight. It's an extraordinary situation. Georgia is another example where you see some of these countries really starting to align themselves closely with Russia. What do you think this means for the stability of Europe?
Well, each case is kind of a separate case. In Georgia, you have that's been going on since for the last 10 years at least. The Ivanishvili's party of the oligarch winning elections and basically holding on to power and strengthening it. In Slovakia, there is this kind of growth of not necessarily a kind of pro-Russian, but certainly a national populism across Europe, and also you have the just been formed new government with right-wing populist party in Netherlands. You have European elections coming up, which the populist parties, which tend to be anti-liberal, against the liberal consensus, and by the extension, this tends to be also have a more kind of sympathetic view towards Russia, is actually gaining upper hand. So yeah, that's the deal. That there is problems on the battlefield. The initial stakes of winning the war outright with Western help doesn't help. It didn't work. And you also have frustration both inside Ukraine, but also in European Union more generally. And that's not even talking about, American elections with, Trump and Biden. So it's all not looking very well.
Alex, I tell you, the things that we're juggling on the global stage at the moment, it is a tough one to try and to unravel. Good to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.